Um, Upon receiving my certification, I began the application process and I was employed by the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office.
How long were you a regular road patrol deputy prior to ascending to become a detective?
I was a road patrol deputy for approximately 6 years, I believe, 7 years, somewhere around there.
And how long have you been in the violent crimes unit as the homicide detective?
Now 3 years.
Tell us a little bit about that. How does one move from being a road patrol deputy to detective?
Sure. So throughout your career, as I'm sure is with any other career, one develops specific interests based off of the things that we experience and the investigations we become involved in. I became interested in investigations. I was further interested in violent crimes investigations. I always enjoyed the intricacies of the investigations and the just the multifaceted, all the things that were involved in these investigations. So I started turning my training more toward long-term investigations, such as homicide investigations. I was fortunate years in the state attorney's office's rooms task force, during which time I was able to.
It is a narrative, but I'm going to allow her to complete just to explain how she got to where she is on the sheriff's office team. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I was able to do long-term investigations and work closely with people with a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience. And I was actually able to work my first manslaughter investigation while on that task force. So that was really my firsthand experience with working such a long-term investigation. At that point, I did return to the road, to road patrol after the task force, and I focused on going to the Violent Crimes Division and specifically homicide. I applied and interviewed, and I was chosen.
You become a detective in a violent crimes unit. Can you tell us whether or not there is a training program when you actually enter that area of the sheriff's office?
Yes, ma'am.
Tell us about that.
Sure. So there's what's called a UTO, or a unit training officer, and all detectives are required to go through a training process where we are exposed to the different types of calls, different types of investigations that we'll be involved in. And during that time, we get our true training to learn how to do the job. And then clearly, once we are out of training, that's when the real experience starts.
And do you have to go for a point of time where you are assisting other more seasoned detectives prior to getting your own assignments?
Typically, we do follow more seasoned detectives, but depending on the investigator, there isn't a specific time that they wait before you're assigned your first homicide. It varies from person to person.
By the time you, are you the lead detective in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
By the time you got this particular case assigned to you and you were assigned as a lead, your sergeant, can you tell us how many other homicide investigations you had completed?
Your case was my 4th homicide as lead.
Prior to that, had you also been assists on other persons or other cases involving homicides?
Yes, ma'am. And between people and close to lead. I am pretty much in charge of the investigation. I am the person who decides ultimately whether or not there's probable cause to arrest the person. And then moving forward after the initial night of the homicide, it is my job to do any and all follow-up.
All right. Can you tell us whether or not you were called out to the sort of the initial area where law enforcement came in contact with this case back at 40th and Broadway?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that the first scene you went to?
Yes.
Can you tell us approximately when you arrived?
I arrived at approximately 1:13 in the morning.
And when were the calls for service, or the 911 calls as we colloquially call them, when did those come out?
Well, there were kind of three different things going on. At 12:11 a.m. or 00:11 hours, there were two separate shot spotter activations. Shot spotter is a...
Let me pause you there for a second.
Okay.
So you're going to tell us now about shot spotter, but basically is that audio recording of gunshots in a particular area?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And Judge, that's already in evidence. If I could play states, I don't recall actually the numbers. It states 51 for the record.
Okay.
So I sort of interrupted you as you were trying to explain briefly to the jury about shot spotter. We clarified that it is audio only. Talk to us a little bit more about what's happening.
So I believe the Sheriff's Office Communications Division received 12:11 was the time that the shot spotter was activated. The Sheriff's Office was notified at 12 a.m. or 00:12 hours. So that's the first notification of the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office.
All right. So if you need to refer to your notes, you may. However, it's preferable if you can testify based on your recollection without it being recorded by having read your notes. Okay.
Yes.
And Detective, if you could please just let us know when you need to refer to your notes, I think that would assist.
That's fine.
All right. With the shot spotter notifications, is there also a recording of the actual audio from the shooting?
Yes, ma'am.
And can you tell us whether or not there was audio collected for this particular shooting?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And while we're getting that populated play, do you recall the area where the shot spotter notification came out to?
I believe it was in the area of Redwood Drive, which is in Lake Park.
And did that ultimately become the primary crime scene?
Yes, ma'am.
If you could play the first audio clip. And again, for the record, it states 51. Clip 2, please. All right. And if you could next, actually, before you move on from clip 2, Detective, did you notice anything specifically about that clip?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was it about the clip that was of importance?
In the beginning of the clip, it's common for these sound clips to pick up other sounds going on. For example, I'm not saying that's specific to this case, but for example, if somebody's screaming at the time, you may hear it in these audio clips. In this instance, and in this clip that Ms. Edwards is referring to, I could hear what sounded to me like a vehicle revving its engine or driving quickly.
If you could just play clip 2 again, and I don't know if there's any way to enhance or make it louder. All right, let's try. So that was just a vroom at the beginning, and then you hear the shots.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. If you keep playing. Please. Clip 5, please. And finally, clip 6. Detective, can you tell us in total how many rounds were registered by the ShotSpotter system?
I believe 38 were registered by the ShotSpotter system.
All right, thank you. Okay. So after the ShotSpotter system, were there any additional notifications now returning to the 911 calls?
Yes.
And when was the first 911 call, if you recall?
I would have,
Actually, can we just focus on the 911 call related to Keyshawn Jones? Do you recall what time that was?
0018 hours, I believe, is the time that West Palm Beach Police Department received a 911 call from Mr. Lowe's phone.
Okay. So you knew from the information collected from that that the 911 phone or the phone that was utilized was Mr. Lowe's phone?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you had an opportunity to listen to that recording?
Yes, ma'am.
And have you had an opportunity to speak to the individuals involved in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to identify who the caller was?
I believe it was Mr. Lowe.
All right. Now, as the investigation proceeds, I think you referenced that you went to 40th and Broadway. What did you see when you arrived at that location?
When I arrived at the location, I observed a dark-colored sedan that was stopped, kind of parked haphazardly on the property located on the southwest corner of Broadway and 40th. There were many law enforcement officers there at that time because at the time we had both West Palm Beach Police Department as well as the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office responding. And there were 2 individuals whom I later learned were occupants of the vehicle, as well as a deceased vehicle in the front passenger seat.
Okay. So let me see if I can slow that down and take that apart.
Sure.
There's a decedent in the front seat of the same vehicle, that dark Cadillac. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And you said there were 2 additional occupants that are now outside of the vehicle.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you note in the roadway or near the vehicle any oily substances?
Yes, ma'am.
Could you tell us about that?
Beneath the vehicle was a dark-colored liquid substance.
Did you meet with the individuals that had been inside the vehicle?
Yes, ma'am.
And could you identify for us whom those individuals were?
Yes, ma'am. I spoke with Keyshawn Jones as well as Christopher Lowe.
Were the individuals separated prior to you speaking to them?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Tell us a little bit about what kind of interview is taking place, if any, at this point in the investigation.
They were separate sworn statements at the time. I'm getting initial information, but I am asking very specific questions. So I'm getting a clear picture from their testimony as to what occurred that evening.
I want to ask you a little bit about, prior to arriving on scene, are you essentially a blank slate?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you respond to a call thinking that you already know who the suspect is going to be and who the victims, if there is such a thing, going to be?
Absolutely not.
Okay. And how is it that you go about determining sort of those things?
Well, I mean, as they say, I can only work off of the evidence that I have, the physical evidence that's on scene, the testimony that's provided to me by the involved individuals.
Okay. When you arrived on scene prior to arriving physically, had any firearms been located in this investigation?
No, not prior to arrival.
All right. Tell us briefly about the context of these testimonial statements from Mr. Lowe and Mr. Jones. Did you determine that the area where you were was not the primary crime scene?
Yes, ma'am.
And were you also able to determine that there were other individuals besides these two that were involved in the incident?
Sustained.
Were you able to identify whether or not any other individuals were involved in this incident?
Overruled.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did you, at that point, stay on scene? And if so, what else did you do besides speaking to the two gentlemen?
I spoke to the two gentlemen. I obtained a consent to search affidavit for the Cadillac for a formal search and processing at a later time.
Who did you obtain that from?
Keyshawn Jones. I did do I'm not going to call it a search because I didn't go through anything, but I did observe quite closely the scene, the decedent, the vehicle as it was, the state that it was in at that time. I also made...
Stop you there before you go further.
Yes, ma'am.
Upon looking at the decedent, did it appear to you that he had been holding any items in his hand?
Oh, well, overruled. I'll let you get into it on cross. Go ahead, you can answer the
Did he
question.
appear to be holding anything in his hand?
No, ma'am.
What can you tell us about the decedent?
I'm sorry, you got to use better grammar than that. Your first question was, did he appear to have been holding? And then you asked, did he appear to be holding?
Okay.
So the tense was misleading. Got it? All right, so go ahead again, please. You're welcome.
Now, could you please tell us whether or not Mr. Sebastian Jean-Jacques, did you identify that was the decedent?
Yes, ma'am.
Was he holding anything in his hand?
No, ma'am.
Did he appear to have, at some point before, held something in his hand?
No, ma'am.
What could you tell us about the vehicle itself that Mr. Jean-Jacques was sitting in? Did you note any defects, anything of need that would cause you to want to investigate further?
Yes, ma'am.
What was that?
There were numerous defects. I didn't count them there, but there were many defects throughout the vehicle. The vehicle appeared to have damage on it. I know the front passenger's tire was, at least that tire was flat. There was, like I said before, I'm not a car person, so I don't know exactly what it was, but there was a fluid leaking beneath the vehicle.
And can you tell us whether or not you've had other investigations that involve potential gunshot impacts to a vehicle?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that something that you would have to really determine whether or not this potentially was gunshot impact?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you do that in this case?
Yes, ma'am.
And could you tell us whether or not it appeared to be gunshot defects?
Yes, ma'am.
As part of your investigations, have you also had to determine whether or not those gunshot impacts are as a result of firearm being inside the vehicle and firing out of the vehicle versus outside firing in? Have you had to do that?
Overruled. All right, I'll let you do that after lunch. Ladies and gentlemen, the lunches are here, so we're going to take a half-hour break. So we'll be back please at 12:33. 12:33. I'll give you a minute to get out. Remember to obey the 4 cardinal rules. You will not run in. You will not run into any of us out there because you're going to be eating your lunches in the jury room. However, remember to obey the other 3 cardinal rules. Open mind, no research, and no discussion about the case.
Pass face down, numbers up.
When we get back, we'll start that board here, okay?